Hi, I'm Dr. Howard Zucker. Today we're talking about the chemicals in everyday use that could be harming our children. Leading health researchers issued a call to arms earlier this year, raising increased concerns about the links between childhood illnesses and the chemicals that they are exposed to. In certain situations, like plastic bottles and containers, even shampoos and toys, they may pose a risk or a danger to our children. Well, today we're joined by the guru of chemical exposures, Dr. Phil Landrigan, about those dangers and what you can do to keep your children safe. Back in the 1960s, Dr. Landrigan showed that lead was dangerous to our children's brains and it lowered their IQs. And he convinced the government to remove the lead from gasoline and paint. And in today's episode of Docology, we'll discuss the new threats out there. So I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Landrigan to our podcast. Dr. Landrigan is the head of the Global Public Health Center at Boston College. So Phil, thank you for joining us here. And I thought
Howard, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, great. Thank you. And I thought I'd just jump right in and ask one of the key questions, which I'm sure all of our subscribers are wondering about. What are the environmental toxins inside the house, outside the house, that are really putting our children at risk?
Well, the current situation is that there are thousands of chemicals in consumer products, and everything from shampoo to toothpaste to kitchen utensils to even the clothing that we wear. And I think most people figure when they go to the store and they buy these products in nice packaging and everything, that somebody's looking out for them, that somebody has tested these chemicals, made sure they're safe. People say to themselves, how could it possibly be on the shelves at my retailer if somebody hadn't looked at it? And yet, it turns out that more than 80% of the chemicals in those products that children are exposed to every day have never been tested. So that's really the central issue that I'm concerned about here today.
Are there new items out there that are of concern, or is it just in general that they just keep popping up?
There are thousands of chemicals out there. The most recent estimate is that there are 325,000 synthetic chemicals that have been produced since the 1950s. Not all of them are actively on the markets, but that's how many are in the inventory. New chemicals keep popping up all the time. It's very, very difficult to keep track of them because the regulatory system is basically asleep at the switch. It's non-functional.
Now I want to get to that in a second, but I thought one of the key things we should share with our audience is what puts children more at risk? Because a lot of people say, well, I'm exposed to a lot of these chemicals, but kids aren't little adults. So maybe if you could share with everyone a little bit what makes kids more at risk.
You're absolutely right. Kids are not little adults. They're fundamentally, qualitatively different from adults. It's not just a matter of small size. It's a matter of fundamental biological differences. So the most fundamental difference between children and adults, and this applies to infants in the womb during the 9 months of pregnancy as well as small children. The most fundamental difference is that these little creatures are growing and developing. In the 9 months of pregnancy, the embryo becomes a fetus. It goes from a single egg to billions of very specialized cells by the time the baby is born 9 months later. Those processes are incredibly complex. They're tightly choreographed. And if anything goes wrong with that sequence of events that gives us a healthy child, then you have damage. Anything that can range from brain damage to birth defects to childhood cancers to increased risk for obesity. The other difference between adults and children, once a child is born, is that pound for pound of body weight, a child is much more heavily exposed to toxic chemicals than adults. Children drink approximately 7 times more liquid per pound per day than we do. So if there's any toxic material in their water, in their infant formula, they get a much bigger dose proportionate than we do. And then a third fundamental difference is that kids have many years of life ahead of them. A healthy child can expect to live to be roughly 80 years of age today. What that means is that if any damage is done to the child's cells and tissues during pregnancy or in the first few years after birth, that child has decades to develop an illness like a cancer, like a neurological disease, that is the long-term result of that damage.
And they're also their metabolic rates faster, right? They're breathing faster than adults, so they're taking a lot more, air every minute. I had a quick question about that. Is it, little kids, like my little kids are close to the ground all the time. Does it really matter that, a lot of things fall to the ground? Does it matter that they're sort of exposed to things right on carpets and things of that nature?
Oh yeah. That's an additional risk factor. Little kids are down there on the rug, as a result of their normal behavior when they're 2 years old, 3 years old. They're putting everything in their mouth. And what that means is if there's anything toxic in the rug, whether it's lead paint chips or pesticides or some kind of a flame retardant in the rug, kids will transfer that into their mouths much more efficiently.
We saw the effects of lead, and you did an amazing job what you did years ago, because I remember as a resident some of these kids that we saw that were exposed to lead and the dangers there. I wanted to highlight a little bit about your article, the New England Journal of Medicine article, because that talks about the hazards that manufactured chemicals pose to our kids. And you mentioned in there about the laws, and you say that they encourage these chemical production companies to just expose our kids to some of these risks, and it's broken legislation, as you say in there. Maybe you could explain a little bit about what you mean by broken legislation, and how do we fix that?
Yeah, let me contrast the law that covers chemicals with the federal law that covers chemicals that are intended to be used as pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs, because they're both prescription drugs and consumer chemicals are manufactured chemicals. The only difference between them really is the intent to use, and drugs are very tightly regulated. Prescription drugs must be shown to be safe. They must be shown to be effective. They have to go through clinical trials, and then even after they're on the market, the Food and Drug Administration keeps a close eye on it. From time to time, a drug is found after it gets onto the market to cause adverse effects that weren't picked up in pre-market screening, and the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, pulls it from the market. And the reason prescription drugs are so tightly regulated is that back in the 1950s and 1960s, there was a terrible episode called the thalidomide tragedy, in which a sedative called thalidomide was widely prescribed to pregnant women, not much in the USA, but a lot in Europe. And 9 months later, those pregnant women started delivering babies that were missing limbs, missing arms, missing legs, in some cases missing all 4 limbs. It was great, and there were 10,000 babies born, at least 10,000 born with this birth defect before the length of thalidomide was recognized, and thalidomide was pulled off the market. The episode was so shocking, so dreadful, that it got the attention of regulators around the world, and including in the United States. And very strict laws were passed regulating pharmaceuticals. By contrast, there is nothing comparable for the chemicals that we encounter in everyday use in food packaging and clothing and household goods. There is a law on the books. It's called the Toxic Substances Control Act, referred to as TSCA. And the intent is great. TSCA basically says that chemicals should be tested before they come to market, and chemicals that are already on the market should be monitored. The intent was great. But in reality, TSCA doesn't work because the enforcement has been so pitifully weak that in the last 45 years since TSCA was passed in 1976, only 5 or 6 chemicals have been removed from the U.S. market in a time when tens of thousands of new chemicals have come on the market. So basically, we and our children are fundamentally unprotected against chemicals unless the chemical is intended for use as a pharmaceutical.
So what's preventing some of these reforms? Is it the industry? Is it Congress? Is it the administrations? I mean, it could be EPA, HHS, FDA. And I did want to ask you a little bit about that. Do you think there are certain things that should be done to change that?
Yeah, well, in our New England Journal of Medicine article, we advanced the argument that drugs that go into, that chemicals that go into consumer products should be and come into contact with children should be subject to the same degree of regulatory oversight as chemicals that go into pharmaceuticals, because both of them get into children's bodies. Sometimes they're fairly substantial amounts, and yet one is regulated and the other is unregulated. So we argue that there needs to be fundamental revamping of TSCA to protect children's health. So then you ask the question, what's the obstacle to that? So the obstacle is basically the power of the chemical industry. The chemical industry is immensely powerful. It's a major contributor to the national economy, the GDP. It has an extremely powerful lobbying organization in Congress, the American Chemistry Council, and the ACC leans on the Congress. It leans on the regulatory agencies, which in this case is primarily the EPA, to keep the regulations weak and to let chemicals onto the market with no effective pre-market screening for toxicity.
So let's say we could just zoom in the new head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin. What would you say to him about how to change some of those laws, but also other ways to make sure our children's health is protected as it relates to the environment, obviously?
Yeah, well, I would begin by telling Mr. Zeldin, Administrator Zeldin, that the primary responsibility of the Environmental Protection Agency is to protect human health. Of course, EPA protects the environment. That's in the title of the agency. But it protects the environment in order to protect human health. And most especially, it should be protecting the health of children, because our kids, our grandkids, are the most vulnerable members of our society. So I would, if I had the chance to sit down with Mr. Zeldin for a half hour, I'd say, listen, Mr. Zeldin, you've got to fundamentally, you got to speak to Congress and work with them to fundamentally reform the Toxic Substances Control Act, model it on food and drug legislation, and subject the chemicals that go into children's products and other consumer products to the same kind of regulatory oversight as goes into pharmaceuticals. There's other things I could tell him too, but that I'd start there.
Well, as long as we're talking about the pharmaceutical side, I'll bring another precedent to the Zoom. Another precedent in the federal government. So we have the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, right, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His mantra is "Make America Healthy Again." Right, and there have been some recent statements about getting the contaminants out of food, out of the baby formula, and the other products. So I'm curious that can he achieve that goal? What would you share with him to make sure kids' health or the health of children are safe from chemicals and from other products as well?
Yeah, well, I actually had I had the privilege to spend some time with Mr. Kennedy when we were both in New York. So I know him to a certain extent. We like each other. And he has a lot of record, a very effective record of being a very successful environmental attorney. He was the person who founded Hudson Riverkeeper, and the Riverkeeper movement has spread around the country and even worldwide since then. So he's been focused on toxic chemicals for a long time, and I should say that he has spoken out about the need to get toxic chemicals out of American children. So I would basically say the same thing to him that I would say to Lee Zeldin, and that is that I would want to work with him to restructure the Toxic Substances Control Act so that it required toxicity testing of chemicals before they came to market and protected children's health.
And he did mention that he wants the FDA to explore the rulemaking, right, that allows these certain substances that are declared generally regarded as safe. So the question is, can one achieve that goal? Do you think that some of the challenges may be others pushing back? You mentioned the industry. Who else could potentially push back on it?
Well, the biggest pushback will come from the industry. The industry has deep resources, deep pockets, and they'll push back hard. And then there will be some pushback from within the agencies too, because a certain number of the people in the agencies are hoping to do their 20 or their 25 years in the federal government and then go right to work for the companies that they're regulating today. And that means they're going to want to go easy on those companies so that they don't jeopardize their chances of getting a job with the chemical industry or the pharmaceutical industry after they leave government service. So there's several layers of resistance, but that's what leadership is all about. And effective leaders will cut through that and can make things happen.
Yeah, I do want to mention a little bit about something I raised right at the beginning about these plastic water bottles, and I thought maybe you could share with our subscribers. Are these plastic water bottles, particularly the ones that sit in hot cars, or the microwave plastic that's in a container, are these dangerous to our kids?
Yeah, I think what people have to recognize is that plastics are chemicals. They're nothing more than plastics are a chemical product. 99% of them are made from fossil fuels, from coal, from oil, from gas. And plastics have thousands of chemicals in them, which include some very toxic chemicals that can cause cancer, chemicals that can cause birth defects, chemicals that can disrupt the functioning of the endocrine system in the human body. And those chemicals that are in plastics can get out of plastics and into food and into beverages. So yeah, when people drink water or any kind of a beverage out of a plastic bottle, they're getting chemicals, and they're probably also getting microplastics into their body, into their bloodstream. Heating food, eating anything in microplastics in the microwave, in plastics in the microwave is especially dangerous, because when you heat stuff up in the microwave, that microwave energy drives the chemicals out of the plastic container into the food, into the soup that you're eating up. Highly processed foods are loaded with chemicals, whereas stuff that comes from the garden has much lower levels of chemicals.
Can you just mention to our subscribers a little bit about microplastics and nanoplastics, just so they understand what they are? Because obviously, I assume you mean these small little chemicals that are out there, which are very minuscule.
Yeah. So what are microplastics and nanoplastics? Microplastics and nanoplastics are the little tiny invisible particles that result when plastic breaks down. So when you throw plastic away, when it goes into the landfill, it goes into the river, into the ocean, which a lot of it unfortunately does, it breaks down. The wind, the weather, the tides break it down, and eventually you end up with microplastics, which are invisible particles, which contain all of the same toxic chemicals that are in the plastic for which the microplastics originated. And those microplastics then get into drinking water. They get into the food chain. They're in fish. They're in meat. And we eat them. Some of them become airborne, in fact, kick up into the atmosphere, and we breathe them. And those microplastic particles, think of those Trojan horses. Think of those little chemical delivery systems that deliver all of the chemicals that are in plastics into your body.
So a big concern, that's a huge concern. We're going to get to our audience where our subscribers have questions. But one last question. If the legislation doesn't change, then how do we protect our kids from these environmental exposures? Maybe it's two questions. And where, as a parent, where I'm a parent and there are all these parents out there, where should they turn for accurate information about the potential dangers to their children?
Okay. So parents have power. This is important. Parents are not powerless in the face of this. And I always, when I'm talking to parents, I say, listen, you can act on three levels. Firstly, you're the CEO of your own home. You control what you buy. You control what comes into the home. It leads to the childsafety. And so you can make a deliberate choice to buy less plastic, to use fewer chemical products. For example, avoid pesticides around the home. Whenever possible, buy organic food. I know it costs a bit more, and that's unfortunate, but it contains far fewer chemicals than processed food. Don't use plastic bags when you go to the market. Take a cloth bag and bring it back up. Reduce your plastic footprint. Secondly, you can operate at the level of your town, your city, your state. You can work with your town meeting if you're in New England. You can work with your legislators if you're in other states to, for example, ban synthetic turf fields at the school. Use fewer pesticides at the school. Convert the dining facilities away from plastic and back to metal cutlery. And finally, the third level is that we're all citizens. We're members of the wider society, and we have the power to vote. and we can vote for candidates of whichever party that act to protect our children's health.
So we have, it's good because we have some agency on this issue to make this, which is great. Well, we've covered a lot, and this is when we turn to our most important guest, which is our subscribers out there. So as we tee that up for their questions and concerns, I just always want to mention that what we share on the podcast is for informational purposes and not in the place of a doctor's visit. So if you have any medical questions that relate to your own health, absolutely talk to your doctor because they know your medical history. But let's turn to what our subscribers are wondering about. Kat, can we put on our first Docology caller for today?
We got Joe here. So Joe, go ahead and yourself and ask a question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi there. So, I'm a father of 3 little kids who consume berries like they're breathing air. And so we make multiple trips to the grocery store every week just to get, fresh fruit in the house. And so what I was wondering, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but, is there a significant advantage between getting organic fruit and vegetables versus conventional? And is it really worth the price increase that you're going to pay in order to do that? And then a follow-up question to that would be if, most of these things come prepackaged in plastic packaging. And so what's the alternative there? How do we push, I guess, manufacturers and farmers to put these products in more sustainable or better for you packaging, so that we aren't potentially exposed to things like microplastics in just like a strawberry container?
Yeah, great questions. And obviously you have more power in relation to the first than in relation to the second. So the big advantage of organic food over conventional food is that it contains far fewer pesticides than conventionally grown food. When I say organic, I'm specifically referring to stuff that is labeled USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, certified organic. That's not the same as somebody saying natural or local. Those terms are meaningless. But USDA certified organic has been well shown in multiple studies to contain 90% less pesticide than conventionally grown food. I think the jury's out whether it has more vitamins, more minerals, more nutrients, but it certainly has less toxic stuff in it. And so I think to the extent you're able to afford it, you should do it. The way for people working on a tight budget, pick the foods that your kids really eat in large quantities and you can buy organic for those products and don't worry so much about the stuff that they only eat once or twice a week. The packaging issue is much more difficult because the individual consumer, like yourself, Joe, doesn't have a lot of control over that. One thing you can do in the summertime, if you're in the northern half of the country, is buy as much of your food as you can at a farmer's market. But I know that's a pain in the neck. You have to be there on the right day of the week at the right time, all of that stuff. The only other thing you can do is when you go to the supermarket is look for stuff that's not packaged in plastic, which I know full well, I've been there myself, is hard to find. But there's some produce which is not in plastic, and if you bring a cloth bag to the store with you, you can pop the apples or the oranges, whatever it is, into that cloth bag.
Thank you, Phil, for that answer. Joe, do you find that it just takes a lot of time to do all this when you go in the grocery store and everyone doesn't, I guess we just all don't have enough time to try to address all this, but we have to, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
That's the thing about plastic. It's extremely convenient. It's really, really convenient. It makes our lives a lot easier, but then there's this invisible downside.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Phil. Yeah. Who else do we have?
Now I'm going to bring up Miss Leslie Ann.
Great. Leslie Ann, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. Great.
I have a few questions as a mother in a real world. Number one, really, how realistic is it? I mean, parents have power and you're the CEO of your family or whatever, but kids are eating, they're on teams, they're traveling, they're visiting friends' houses, they're playing with plastic toys. I mean, how much do we really have control there? And what's realistic? What is the realistic difference that we should be making with our children? And then I'm also wondering whether these chemicals and plastics have any impact on the ADD rates and other those sort of related diagnosis that we're seeing in young children. And finally, as a mother of a son who has a long list of allergies, there was a lot of thinking with allergies to sort of expose him over time to many things. And he has outgrown most of those as we've exposed him to plenty. But is that the same? If we bubble wrap our kids and keep all chemicals away from them, are we helping them in the real world?
Well, the only problem, the bubble wrap's plastic too, right?
Like,
Well, thank you for that question, Leslie. And you got to be realistic. And of course, you can't, especially as you could grow up, as they get into the teen years. If your ability to protect them against chemicals is definitely limited. But on the other hand, the time when they are most vulnerable is when they're smallest. During the 9 months of pregnancy, during the first 2 or 3 years after birth, what we pediatricians refer to as the first 1,000 days of life. That's the time when it's most important to protect kids against chemicals. And any reasonable measures that you can take during that time to reduce your child's exposure to manufactured chemicals is a good thing. And it'll just like you want to give your child nutritious, healthy food, you also want to protect the child against toxic chemicals to the extent you realistically can. And not beat up on yourself over the stuff that you can control, because obviously you can't control it. It's not possible. So your second question is, what about the links between some of these chemicals and attention deficit disorder, ADD, or other learning disabilities in children? The answer is yes, there are connections. One class of chemicals, which is widely used in plastics, pretty much any flexible plastic like a rubber ducky has this class of chemicals in it, which are called phthalates, spelled PHEHALATES, phthalates. Phthalates are nasty chemicals, especially if a pregnant mom is exposed to them during the 9 months of pregnancy. They'll get into her body. They'll pass right through the body of her unborn child in the womb. And into the child, they can cause two types of damage. Firstly, they can cause damage to the developing brain and increase the child's risk of ADD. And then secondly, they can cause damage to the child's reproductive organs, especially in baby boys, meaning that the reproductive organs are going to be smaller. They're going to be somewhat feminized. And there's the risk that when the little boy grows up and reaches reproductive age, his sperm count, his fertility will be diminished. And the reason those chemicals, those phthalates and lots of other toxic chemicals are on the market is because of weak federal regulation. And a lot of people think the word regulation is a dirty word. But speaking as a pediatrician and also a parent and a grandparent, if you change the word regulation to public health protections or public health safeguards, it's all about the language. If you think of strong laws as safeguarding your kid's health, then they become a good thing. And that's why I'm arguing for it.
And what about the allergies, the issue with allergies?
I don't know that toxic chemicals have much to do with allergies.
Got it. So it's another issue which we'll bring up, I'm sure, in one of our future Docology podcasts. That was a little, Phil, some of the things you brought up is sort of scary because a lot of people are exposed to a lot of these products that they're out there all the time. People have one kid, then they're pregnant with another kid, right? There's that little toy sitting around the house and they're playing with the first child and the second child. It's really nerve-wracking to hear some of those.
Yeah, and one of the things that we pointed out in that article that we published in January in the New England Journal of Medicine is that even though children today are healthier by many measures, they live longer, for example, rates of a whole series of chronic diseases in children are steadily increasing. The incidence of childhood cancer is about 35%, asthma has tripled, obesity has quadrupled, some growth defects of the reproductive organs have doubled. So there's, even though in the face of an apparent good health of our American children, there are some You get your head, it's going on in the wrong direction. And what we're trying to do as doctors is prevent that, keep kids healthy.
But exactly, I mean, the future of our, of the world, our nation and the whole world. Thank you. And thank you, Leslie. And great questions. Great questions. Kat, who else do we have?
So we have our final question, I believe, unless another one comes in while we're taking this question from Mr. John.
Hi, Dr. Landrigan. And thank you for a lifetime spent protecting our kids.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
I wonder whether there are any lessons from your success in helping to get lead regulated back in the day that would apply to the situation today, things that work then that might work now in motivating people who have the power to regulate these things to do so. And related to that, do you think that the environment is more conducive to that sort of effort now with RFK Jr. hit in place, given what you said about him earlier?
Yeah. So I think there are several lessons that I learned, my colleagues learned from the lead wars of the 70s and 80s. The first is the power of partnership. You've got to no one person can do it alone, and any of these big success stories in public health represent the work of a team, and they tend to be a diverse team. They're not just all just people that look the same. They're people who come from many different backgrounds, different political philosophies, but share a common goal. Well, and in the case of lead, that goal is to protect American kids against lead and keep them from suffering brain damage and consequences of lead. We brought in people from the faith communities who were worried about damage done to unborn children in the womb. We brought in pediatricians, brought in parents. We also brought in business people who saw an opportunity. There were some of the gasoline companies that lead, as you'll recall back then, was added to gasoline. And a couple of the companies recognized that there was a market for unleaded gasoline, and so they got into the market with unleaded gasoline before the big producers did. If I recall correctly, Amoco was the first to bring out unleaded gasoline. And another big lesson is persistence. You just have to hang in there. You have to take some slings to arrows, and you have to just keep going, even when things don't look good. And a third lesson is that not all power in this country is vested in Washington, D.C. Yes, indeed, the federal government is very powerful, and its regulatory reach extends far and wide, but there is also a lot of regulatory power in state capitals, especially in the bigger states. And if a big state passes a regulation, for example, banning a certain toxic chemical, that disrupts national markets and forces the chemical industry to reconsider their ways. And if 3 or 4 states join together, the way, for example, a number of states joined together to fight tobacco legislation some years ago, it can totally change the shape of the national market.
Well, those are great questions, Jonathan. I read today even that some of the states, back to the issue you mentioned about states, are talking about food additives. And so perhaps it will end up that the states take charge and move forward some of the legislation within the states. California clearly did that on some of the environmental issues and over the years as well.
Yeah, no, if a big state like California were to ban a product like food additives, California being one of the biggest markets in the world, if they really ban a food additive, it's going to change the national market because the big national producers cannot produce one set of products for the rest of the country and a separate one.
Well, and following up to what John just mentioned, you are really, Phil, a testament to the belief that just keep pushing forward, given what you've achieved, not only on the issues of lead, but so many other areas in your career to tackle environmental toxins that are out there. So we, on behalf of everyone, we thank you for that. And I just want to thank you for this incredibly informative podcast. And the next time I pick up something that I give my children, I'll be wondering what what you said and your words of wisdom will be inside my head there. So I just want to.
We have one more question.
Oh, great! Excellent.
I'm gonna bring up Anna here. She has a question for you, my doctor. Hi, Dr. Zucker. Hi, Dr. Landrigan.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for taking our questions. My question is about chemicals and clothing. And are there any specific types of clothing or fabrics that pose like a higher risk of chemical exposure? And also, do you know of any certifications or standards that consumers should seek to ensure clothing is free from harmful chemicals?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, some clothing is made entirely out of chemicals. For example, polyester clothing, and some has no chemicals at all in it, like stuff that's made from wool or cotton or linen. And and I think the general rule is when you go to the market, look for when you go to the clothing store, look for stuff that's made to the extent possible from natural fibers.
All right. Thank you.
Hanu, that's a great point that you raised about the clothing. And maybe I could just dovetail on that for a second. Back to kids. What about all of these new sheets that you put a little sheet on the crib, and sometimes people say wash it first because of all the chemicals. Can you provide a little advice on that? Because they're brand new, the manufacturer, is that a risk?
Yeah, I think washing new clothes, washing new sheets before you wear them or use them for the first time is a good idea. Also, you mentioned the crib. You know, a lot of crib mattresses are loaded with chemicals. There are this class of chemicals called brominated flame retardants, which are really nasty chemicals. Which they cause brain damage. They reduce children's IQ. And there are mattresses on the market that are free of toxic chemicals, Nature-Pedic, for example. And to the extent that people can afford to buy them, I strongly encourage staying away from chemical-laden mattresses because your child spends 6, 8, 10, maybe more hours per day in intimate contact with that mattress.
But absolutely, I was mentioning that those first 1,000 days, a lot of those hours I spend right there on that mattress and in that crib. I thought about that when I got the crib for my kids as well. Well, that is it for our show today. I thank you again, Phil. This is a phenomenal discussion. So remember, if you are a Docology subscriber, you can join the show, ask your questions just by clicking on the link in the bio. So tune in next time for the next Docology episode, because the topic we cover may just save your life.
Docology's production of Hang Media. Our producer is Catherine Wong. Ronnie Zelig is our editorial advisor. Our creative director is Anna Richard. Janine Wilson of Wilson Media Group handles paid marketing. Our publicists are Leslie Ann Wade and Jerry Carapoli. And our executive producer is John Clark. Theme music was composed by Nick Chitz. Subscribe and join our community at docology.life. Until next time, exercise, wash your hands, and stay healthy.